All righty, so this is the last week, so we're just going to kind of review and go over some test tips, and yeah, we'll go from there. So we're gonna I pulled some information on the exams, so we'll look at that and then do some test tips, and then we'll do lots of practice and calculations. So I wanted to ask if you guys had anything specific that you wanted me to go over. Obviously, I won't be able to throw it into the presentation today, but I could alter tomorrow and Friday to include some of those items if there's something specific that you guys are wanting to see. So if you have anything, throw it out there, put it in chat, whatever works for you. Anything off the top of your heads?
Nope. Not for me. But I need to put my little thing on mute.
All righty, well, if you think of something, throw it in chat and we will look at it. I also was going to recommend, I know Manon sent out the very first week of January, I think it was January 4th, she sent out the pre-test. And so my recommendation would be if you can go back and find that pre-test, go ahead and take it and see if you did better than you did the first time. She also included the answers so you can grade yourself. No cheating, but you can grade yourselves. So. Okay, so make sure that you download the handbooks. Those are online. I put the links in the PowerPoint so you guys have access to those. They are, there's one for the FPC and one for the CPP. They have a lot of good information in them. Hopefully, if you're signed up for those tests, you've already reviewed those handbooks, but make sure that you do if you have not yet. So a little bit about the exam. If you're taking the FPC, your exam is weighted approximately with 29% on core payroll concepts, 17% on compliance, research and resources, 24% on calculating of paychecks, 7% on payroll process and support systems and administration, 7% on payroll administration and management, 8% on audits, and 8% on accounting. If you're taking the CPP exam, the weight is a little bit different. It's going to be 24% on core payroll concepts, 16% on compliance, research and resources, 20% on calculation of the paycheck, 12% on payroll process and supporting systems and administration, 10% on payroll administration and management, 9% on audits, and 9% on accounting. The FPC exam is 150 multiple choice questions, and you have 3 hours to complete it. It does include 25 questions that are pre-test questions, and the pre-test questions are not counted in the scoring of the examination. So in total, there's 125 scoreable questions on the FPC. On the CPP exam, you get 4 hours. There's a few more questions, so there's 190. They are all multiple choice. 25 of them are also pre-test questions, leaving us with 165 scoreable test questions. When you're taking the exam, you will have a few resources available to you, so you want to make sure that you're familiar with those. And these are the only resources that you'll have available to you. So make sure that if there's anything else that you are thinking that you are going to have, that you study it, because you're not going to have access to anything except these items on the actual exam. So I'm not going to read them to you. You can read them out of the PowerPoint. The other thing that I thought was funny is it says candidates are encouraged but not required to use a calculator. I personally would not want to take this exam without a calculator. So I would recommend that you definitely take a calculator. Do be careful, because like I have this fancy calculator from when I was a math teacher, and these are not allowed because it has a keypad on it. And so you can't use a fancy calculator like this. So make sure you have a very basic calculator that's non-programmable. Otherwise, it's not going to be allowed. So helpful hints that they recommend for reducing testing anxiety is know your location of the test. So I don't know if all the testing is remote now or if they're still doing live testing in test centers with COVID. But if you are going to a test center, make sure that you know where it is and you get there early. Make sure that you don't stay up late studying the night before, as that's not going to help you. And then make sure you practice with the actual calculator you're going to use on the exam before you take the exam. So don't use this the whole time for studying and then walk into the exam and have to use a calculator that doesn't have all of that fancy stuff. Make sure you practice with what you're going to be using. Test taking tips before the exam, make sure that you're, again, comfortable with your calculator. Feel free to ask any questions if you are in a testing facility. My biggest thing is read each question carefully. That is the thing that gets me every time is I read the first sentence and I think I'm completely good to go. And I jump to a conclusion of what the answer is going to be. Make sure you read the entire question. They like to give you too much information and you don't always need it. So you want to make sure you read the question carefully, make sure you pick out what is important, and that's the only information that you'll want to work with. So make sure you answer all the questions. So passing or failing is based on the number of questions answered correctly. So it's never smart to leave a question blank. Make sure you're aware of your time. Make sure you have enough time to complete every question, because obviously, again, leaving questions blank is not going to help your score in the least bit. Manage, let's see, if there's time, recheck your calculations. So make sure that, if you have time to go back, check those calculations to make sure you didn't make any silly errors. And then the last test taking tip that they give you is to verify all of your answers to your gross up questions. So how would you go about verifying your answer to a gross up question? Anybody?
Reverse it.
Exactly. So calculate the net amount from your gross up calculation to ensure that you did it accurately. So go ahead and calculate all the taxes, everything that would come out of that check, and make sure that you come up with the correct net amount. Perfect. Okay, so some test taking tips as well as some practice. Make sure that your overtime premium is half of the hourly rate, and that's the regular hourly rate. It's not 1.5 times the hourly rate. So you want to make sure that you're calculating that correctly. So the way that they always tell you to calculate it is you calculate the entire regular pay for the period that is you're making your calculation on, and then divide that by the total amount of hours worked to find your regular rate of pay, and then multiply by 0.5 to get your overtime premium, and then multiply that by the amount of hours that the employee worked that were considered overtime, and then add that amount to your actual regular pay to get the total pay for the period in question. So be a little careful on that one. Sarah is paid a semi-monthly salary of $2,000 and works 35 hours per week. So to calculate her annual salary, we're going to do 2,000 because it's semi-monthly. We're going to multiply by 24 and we get 48,000. And then the hours worked in 1 year, to determine that, we're going to take her 35 hours that she works a week, multiply it by 52 weeks in the year, and we get 1,820 hours. So to get her regular rate of pay, we're going to take her annual salary and divide it by the normal hours that she works, and we get 26.37 per hour for her normal rate of pay. Again, remember to round to 2 decimal places when you're doing these calculations on the exam. So the second piece of this example is that if Sarah works 42 hours in 1 work week, she must be compensated for the hours over 35 because her normal hours are 35 and she's a non-exempt salaried employee. So we must calculate the overtime that's due to her. So to do that, we're going to take her regular rate of pay, which we just came up with, 26.37, multiply it by the additional pay for the 7 hours that she worked over her normal hours, which was 7, and we get $184.59. Now we're going to find her overtime premium pay, which is her regular rate, 26.37 times 0.5. We get $13.19. She worked 2 overtime hours because those were the hours over 40. So we're going to multiply the 1319 times 2, and then we're going to add that 2638 to all of the other things that we've already calculated. So her regular normal pay is 2,000. We had to add in 184.59 for the extra 7 hours that she worked of her regular time. And then the 2 hours of overtime, we have to add in the overtime premium of 26.38. So the total gross amount that she gets for that particular period is $2,210.97. Piecework overtime is also something that they have onto the a few times. I do know I had a calculation question on it. And just remember, like I said, to round as you go on all of your calculations. Can you guys still hear me? My internet says it's not connected.
Yes.
Yeah, you were a little choppy for a second, but you're fine.
I'm back. Okay, good. Sorry. So make sure that you're rounding as you go on all calculations, and that will hopefully get you to the closest answer to the one that they calculated. So 2 decimal places, make sure you round. Do we all know our rounding rules? This is from, like, I don't know, elementary school, middle school? When did you learn to round?
Maybe. Third grade.
So if it's 4 or less, do you round up or down?
Down.
If it's 5 or more, you round up.
Up.
Yeah, so just keep that in mind. Okay. So if you were looking at this example, then there's a couple different ways that you can calculate overtime for piece rate workers. So Brad receives $175 for each doll he assembles, plus 25-cent bonus per doll for each doll over 352 that he assembles in a regular 46-hour work week. In one work week, Brad assembles 420 dolls. So 420 dolls times the amount he gets per doll is 175, so that's 735. He made 68 dolls over the 352. So 68 times his bonus of 25 cents per doll is $17. So his total piecework earning for that period is 735 plus 17, giving us 752. To come up with his regular rate of pay, we're going to again take that total amount that he earned in the week divided by his hours that he worked, which were 46, and we get 1635. Again, make sure you're rounding to those 2 decimal places. To get his overtime premium rate, we're going to do 0.5 times 1635, and we get $8.18. $8.18 times the 6 hours of overtime that he worked is 49.08. And if we add those to the regular earnings plus his overtime premium, we get 801.08. All right, so IRS requirements say that the amount of any benefit that an employer must include as income is the amount by which the fair market value of the benefit exceeds the amount the employee paid for the benefit after taxes. So these are things that you want to remember. So the IFBA, or the includable fringe benefit amount, is equal to the FMV, which is the fair market value, minus the sum of the EAP and the AEL. The EPA is the employer paid amount after taxes, and the AEL is the amount excluded by law. So as an example, Harry's employer pays for Harry's parking space in a commercial parking lot next to the employer's premises. The employer's cost of the space is $320 per month in 2020, which is the same fee charged to all monthly payers. Harry pays nothing for the parking space and has access to it every day. Up to $270 per month of employer paid parking is excluded from income by law in 2020. That's the rate that's excluded for the 2020 IRS regulations. And so Harry has to be taxed on anything that's above that. So the total cost per month is $320 minus any portion that Harry pays out of his pocket with after-tax dollars, plus the 270, which is the excluded amount allowed by the IRS. Since Harry doesn't pay anything, then it's just the $320 minus $270, which is $50 a month. So that's what he gets taxed on. They, in my CPP experience, they asked several questions on the transportation fringe benefits. So
Mine too.
did they? Yeah. Katie, did you have many? She may be busy. So yes, that is definitely something that they asked about on that. Okay. In this example, the company offers its employees a choice between a transit pass and $80 per month in additional compensation. So only those employees who choose the cash instead of the transit pass must have the $80 included in their income each month, because the $80 is less than the limit that's excludable by the IRS. So I also had questions on the vehicle use, several different questions on the vehicle use on my CPP exam, on calculating the fair market value, as well as just questions about when it's taxable to you or how much it would be taxable to you. So keep that in mind. The fair market value using the cents per mile method is to take the miles that you drove in 2020 for personal use and multiply by 0.575. Okay. So for an example, Margaret drives a qualifying vehicle 22,000 miles during 2020, including 9,400 personal miles. If Margaret's employer pays for the gasoline for her car, the fair market value of the personal use of the car is calculated as follows. So we're going to do the 9,000 miles that she drove for personal use times 0.575, which is $5,405. Now, if Margaret pays for the car's gasoline, then the fair market value is the miles that she used times the 0.575 minus 0.055, because she paid for the gasoline in the car. So in that case, it would only be $4,888 that have to be added to her taxable income for the year. Group term life, I definitely had questions on group term life. Make sure that you do have access to this table on the exam, so you don't have to memorize that. But make sure that you understand how to calculate it. As I had a couple questions on the GTL. Did you, Rebecca?
I think she's helping on the phone.
Okay.
No, Lori was talking to me. I'm sorry, so I had me on mute. What's up?
No worries. I just asked if you had GTL questions on your CPP.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Several calculation questions, like actually hand calculating what the cost would be. So
yes. So make sure that you're comfortable with that. GTL is only taxable when it's over how much?
50,000.
50,000, correct. So always make sure that you take out the amount that's excludable from the table. All righty. So make sure that you know and practice the calculation for interest on employer loans. I actually don't think I had a question on this on my CPP exam. Did you, Rebecca or Katie?
I don't recall having this.
I don't either. But it is absolutely fair game to be able to ask the question. So make sure that you're comfortable with those calculations. They ask on my test, I don't know that I had any questions on stock options, but again, they are fair game. So just make sure that you're understanding what those types of items are for stock options. So this is one of the most common things that they do. They give you way too much information for what they're actually asking. So an employee earns $4,500 per month and defers 3% to a 401k plan. The employee is paid semi-monthly. Calculate any taxes that must be withheld from the employee's monthly 401k deferral. So two things about this. Number one, do we care that the employee is paid semi-monthly for what they're asking?
No.
Correct. Number two, they ask you to calculate any federal taxes that must be withheld from the employee's 401k deferral. So if you did not fully read this question, you could very easily get it wrong, because if you just calculate the federal taxes to be withheld from the payment, you would not be answering the question. So make sure you're reading the question. So
And I did get this question, I think maybe even twice on my test.
did you? Yeah. So yes. So they're asking you how much federal taxes will be withheld from the 401k deferral. So the first thing we need to figure out is how much we are actually deferring to the 401k, which is 3% of 4,500, which is $135. So 401ks or deferred compensation plans are not taxable for which taxes?
Did you
said
say not taxable?
Yes. For which
Sure.
taxes?
Federal and state withholding.
Federal and state withholding, exactly. But we would still have to withhold FICA and Medicare, or Social
Yes.
Security and Medicare, out of it.
Yes.
So if we take the $135 that was deferred and we multiply by the Social Security and Medicare rate of, if you combine them, it's 7.65%. We get $10.33 if you round again. So yes, I know I had that question. Katie said she had it a couple times. So know that and make sure you're reading the questions, because they do give you, they do try to throw you off for sure. So deferred compensation regulations, make sure that you know the thresholds, because they do ask question. And I never had a question where they specifically just asked me the threshold, but they will do things like they say an employee has contributed so much to their 401k and they're now getting this payment. And so half of the payment or a portion of the payment will be able to be included with the 401k until that limit. So make sure that you're aware of those limits. And what's the catch-up age?
50, I think.
50 is correct, yes. Catch-up age is 50. So if they tell you the age of the employee, then that's probably a hint that you might be able to contribute more, because they're able to make a catch-up contribution. So know those. Cafeteria plans or Section 125 plans, make sure you know which benefits can be included and which cannot be included. So which ones can be included are, health plans, accident plans, group term life, short-term or long-term, HSAs, those types of things. What cannot be included is educational assistance plans, scholarships, those types of things. Employee discount programs, those cannot be included. So just make sure that you are aware of these things and what can be included and what cannot. The look back period for tax deposits is always what to what?
June, right? The previous, so it's a dumb time frame because it's certainly not calendar year.
It is not
makes you-
calendar year.
Makes you confused.
Right.
So yeah, July to June or
Yeah,
backwards.
you're exactly right. July 1st through June 30th of the previous year. So make sure that, because they did ask me a question on that. And Rebecca, you're 100% correct. It does not follow calendar year, which makes it a little bit more confusing. So make sure that you know that look back period is from July through June. And if it's less than 50,000 for federal taxes, you can be a monthly payer. If it's more than 50,000, then you have to be a semi-weekly payer. The other caveat to this is if an employer ever has to make a next day tax payment because they had over $100,000 tax liability, they automatically become a semi-weekly filer. So I think I had a question on that on my test. So just something to keep in mind that might not be top of mind. Make sure that you know what, or you can determine that you're able to determine if a payday is this day, when is the tax going to be due, based off of a semi-weekly schedule, because I know that I had that question. Monthly depositors are always going to be by the 15th of the following month. And like I say, if you do accumulate, if you do accumulate more than $100,000 on any day during the month, you automatically have to pay it next day. And it also makes you a semi-weekly depositor for the rest of that year. So make sure that you are keeping that in mind. If you have very little tax liability, it's less than $1,000, then you can file a Form 944 instead of a Form 941, and the Form 944 is an annual form. Again, only if you have less than $1,000 in employment taxes for the whole year. And the IRS has to notify you that you are actually a 944 filer. So just be a little careful of that. EFTPS is the system where taxes are paid to the IRS. So there's EFTPS. You can log online and go to EFTPS and pay your taxes. We as a service bureau pay them through EFTPS batch providers. So there's several different ways that you can use it, but it is for paying payroll taxes. Know your forms. The biggest ones that I remember getting questions on were the 941, 943, 944, potentially a 945. I do remember having questions about the 1042 and the 1042S, but not necessarily what it was, but more when it's due. 940 is a big one, W9, W4, and then all the W4 series. So W4P, the reason I can remember that is P is for pension. And the W4S is S is for sick. So that's how I remember those ones. The ones with C's behind them are corrections. So that makes those easy to remember. So make sure you keep those in mind. All right. An employer qualifies to deposit employment taxes quarterly during the first quarter of the year. Under what deposit schedule will it deposit taxes for the remainder of the year? So again, we are remembering that our look back is July 1st through June 30th of the preceding year. Anyone? So it's always
quarterly. Sorry.
That's okay. No, so just because they qualify quarterly for the first quarter doesn't change their schedule for the rest of the year. It's all based off of that look back period. So we don't get to flip flop back and forth. Whatever your look back period says, you are that for the remainder of the year, unless you have over $100,000 accumulate, and then you automatically become a semi-weekly filer.
Don't you think that should be one of the selections or options for answers is, because it does depend on what if they hit over 100,000.
That's true.
If their payroll increases. So
that is true.
It's really kind of deceiving.
It is a little bit. Yep. And that's where Felicia and I were just talking about this, how sometimes you have to choose the best of the answers because they don't give you a really good answer. You know what I mean? So I definitely had questions on this, and I don't know why, but they asked about the multi-worksite reporting, and multi-worksite reporting is filed with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS. So I don't know why they asked questions on that, but they did ask me questions on that one. Forms W-2. So my little weird trick is that I remember as wages go in the odd boxes and taxes go in the even boxes. So if you're ever needing to think about the boxes and which ones are which, for the main things, the wages go in the odd boxes and the taxes go in the even boxes. Now, that being said, there's obviously some boxes that are not wages or tips. I'm sorry, wages or taxes, and so they don't follow that. But as a general rule of thumb, even is for the taxes and odd is for the wages. For some reason, I seem to get questions on dependent care. So that, I don't know why I remember that one really well, but I do. So dependent care goes in what box on the W-4? Or so W-2? I can't speak today. It goes in box 10. So I would keep that one in mind. Box 12 is the one with all the different codes. I'm not going to say you have to have every single code memorized, but I would have a decent idea of the main codes. Definitely code DD, reporting, sick pay, those types of things, the things that are pretty common. And then some of your deferred compensation type of things are also probably fair game. Down at the bottom, this talks about the different systems that are used to file. And because I am the one who files these things, I am pretty good at remembering them. But the main ones that I know about are ACA is filed through AIR, ACA is filed through AIR, and 1099s are filed through the FIRE system. So
I definitely had those questions.
okay, yeah. So I would at least keep those two things in mind. And again, we already talked about EFTPS. It is not for filing, but it is for paying. So keep those in mind. Which form is used by a local government employer when withholding only Medicare tax? So 941s are for payroll tax filing quarterly. 943s are for agricultural. 944s are for those little guys. It's an annual form, and you have, in order to be able to use that form, you have to have $1,000 or less in tax liability. 945s are for annual with income tax withholding, but it's not, I'm sorry, federal income tax from non-income tax withholding. So that one's not as common, I'm going to say, as the first three. So the answer to this one is going to be 941. Wages, certain things are exempt from FUTA. So I would have an idea of those types of things. I didn't get too many FUTA questions that were about wages. I think most of my FUTA questions were just about calculations. What's the FUTA limit for wages? Anyone?
Is it?
I must
Like-
be boring today.
No.
Is it 7,000 or 11?
Yes, 7,000.
Okay.
Sorry,
Stop
can you
testing
hear
me, Melissa.
Sorry. Yes, it is 7,000.
I could hear whoever was asking if they can, if we can hear you. I did hear that just now.
Was that you, Mammon?
Yeah, thanks. I was saying 7,000, but
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, goodness. FUTA deposits. One thing to keep in mind is once you have $500 in liability or more, you have to deposit quarterly. So as a general rule of thumb, we deposit quarterly all the time, even if it's not over 500, but you do not have to until your liability becomes over 500. The 1042, like I say, I don't think I specifically had any questions about this form or what it was, but it is the annual withholding tax return for a U.S. source of income for foreign persons. But I did have questions about when it was due, and it is due on the 15th of March. So not sure how to help you remember that, but I do know that I had questions on it for whatever reason. 943 is the annual income tax return for ag employers. Voiding a check issued in error after all returns were filed will require all of the following procedures except, again, this is another one of those, they put except in there. So make sure that it's everything except this one thing, and it's a refund to the employee. We have to do a W-2C, we have to do a 941X, and we have to file all the appropriate state forms, but since the employee never received the money, we don't actually have to give it back to them. Know your retention requirements. I do know I had questions on this about how long you have to keep things. So make sure that you're familiar with this page and all of the things on it and how long you have to keep stuff. Be able to identify acronyms that because they do ask about them. I think they asked me about, I know they asked about FMLA, probably ADEA. Anyways, I would know some acronyms on those. I think they may have even asked me about HIPAA, but I'm not, maybe I'm getting that confused with a different test. It's a possibility. I take too many tests. So I know I had a penalty question. I would keep for sure these in mind, the $50, the $110, and the $280 for the amounts, the penalties that can be assessed for incorrect W-2 filings. So make sure that you keep those in mind. And like I say, I know that there was questions on those, and keep those dates in mind. So if it's corrected by March 2nd, the penalty is $50 per form. If it's corrected between March 3rd and August 1st, it's $110, and after that, it's $280. So keep those in mind. Be familiar with how to calculate the penalties. Like I say, they did ask me about those. I know I had a question where I had to calculate the penalties. Mine happened to be in the second tier. So keep that in mind.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
On here, when it says a max of 3,392, is that for the company, that max?
Yes. Annually. Yes. So they're going to go ahead and not penalize you for more than $3.3 million. So as an example, a company files 40 forms W-2 from 2020 with the Social Security Administration on July 20th. What is the maximum penalty the company could be assessed? So are we before March 2nd?
No.
Nope.
Nope. We are before August 1st though. So it's going to be that second tier, that 110. So if we do 110 times 40, that gives us 4,400 in penalties, which is well below the actual maximum of 1.6 million. So we would be assessed the $4,400. Again, read carefully because they like to try and trick you. This is Angela's favorite, her accounting. So I did have several accounting questions they do ask. So these types of things are important to know. Make sure that you know the types of accounts. So assets, expenses, liabilities, revenue, and equity. And then you're going to need to know what debits and credits do to each of those types of accounts. Keep in mind, you always have to stay balanced. So if you have an expense, you're also going to have an other side to that. And I unfortunately missed Angela's teaching when she taught this section. I'm sad about it because I heard it was just phenomenal. But make sure you're aware of those. The balance sheet, make sure you're aware of that. The balance sheet is the way I remember the income statement anyway is income comes from revenue. And so your income statement is going to be your revenue minus all of your expenses to give you your income. And your balance sheet is your assets, which is your liabilities plus your equity. So journal entries that deal with accounting. I know many of us are not accountants, so these things are not the easiest things to remember, but they are important and they are going to ask you about them on your test, I guarantee it. So an asset, if you debit an asset, you are going to increase it. If you credit an asset, you're going to decrease it. So the easiest asset that we can all remember is what?
Yeah.
Cash. It's cash. So if you can remember that you have to debit cash to increase it, then you can always remember that a debit will increase an asset. And counter to that, a credit will decrease an asset. So if you can remember that credits decrease cash, then that will help you get to the rest of the table. For liabilities, and I work backwards. So if a credit decreases cash, you usually, for example, pay a liability with your cash. So if you have to credit cash to decrease it, then you would have to debit a liability to decrease it. So I work backwards that way, and that may or may not be confusing to you. But liabilities, if you debit a liability, it's decreasing. If you credit a liability, it's increasing. Equity is the same. So if you decrease, you are debiting, and to increase, you are crediting. Income or revenue, a debit decreases, a credit increases. And expenses, a debit increases and a credit decreases. So those things I would know for sure. And we will go through a couple of examples, but we are almost out of time. So does anybody have any questions now? I promise I have examples on some debit and credit questions. Did anybody think of anything they want me to focus on tomorrow or do more examples?
I already talked to you about mine.
I promise I put some.
Can you like take the test for me?
Oh,
Can we
Well-
arrange that? Put on like, you know, my face and just do it.
I meet in New York. You know.
When is your test, Felicia?
Friday.
Oh, this
Be
week?
great. You're gonna be great.
That's
With the
You are going to do great. Manon, have you scheduled yours yet?
Haven't.
You haven't. Okay.
I have to take it this fall, but I have not scheduled it yet.
I don't want to wait till the fall. I feel like it's gonna be harder.
Time-wise, like I don't qualify to take it in the spring. I have to take it in the fall.
Oh, I didn't think
I'm
about
so
that.
bummed.
Oh, that's annoying.
That sucks.
All right. Well, all right, then I guess we'll do that for today. If you guys think of anything that you want me to specifically go over, just shoot me an email. Or since you're all on my team, you can just shoot me a Teams message.
Thank you, Melissa. You did a good
Thanks,
job.
Melissa.
Yeah. Holler at me if I can help.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.